we can use inquiries better?
Well, this is a very timely question because there's a piece of work which is being led by HSSIB, by Rosie Bennyworth, their interim chief exec, around recommendations, because the system is awash with recommendations. You could even say we're drowning in recommendations. And those recommendations don't necessarily have to be of a certain level of evidence. They don't necessarily have to relate to any previous recommendations that have been made in the system. And particularly for trusts and other providers, when these recommendations come in, they are the ones who are holding the risk. So I'm really excited by this piece of work which we're supporting because it will help us to think about the value and purpose of recommendations and how we can make sure that they are really helpful and effective and therefore able to be implemented, because at the moment it does feel like a very, very busy landscape in terms of recommendations, who's making them, who's monitoring them, and whether they are actually effective when they've been implemented.
Do you think part of the problem is about ownership of those recommendations and accountability for delivering them?
I think it's a really good point, and we've made 3 sets of recommendations, 2 to the Department of Health and Social Care and 1 to NHS England. At the 3-month point after making a recommendation, we publish on our website to see whether we've received a response, whether those recommendations have been accepted. But then there's the actual monitoring and the implementation of those recommendations. So we've thought quite hard about what resource it takes for us to continue to track recommendations, and the more that we would make, the bigger that resource would become. This is why I think it needs to be all the way through from the beginning to the end, and somebody needs to own the recommendations. So for example, from the Cumberledge review, one of the recommendations that Baroness Cumberledge made was to have a task force to actually track the implementation. That wasn't set up, but we've been pursuing some of the ones which are still unfinished, around, for example, transparency, and we're wanting to make sure that those do actually, get to a point where we can see the change in the health landscape. But it's almost the easiest thing to do is make a recommendation. The hardest thing to do is to be the one who's either got to make sense of it or that somebody actually tracks to see whether it was effective or not.
Just a final question on that theme. Do you think, therefore, we make too many recommendations?
Well, this is the work that HSSIB are looking at in terms of, do recommendations need to come with funding? Is there, do they all need to be accepted? And who is actually bearing the risk if the recommendations are made? And for example, a trust has to prioritise which ones they're able to do, which ones aren't suitable for them, etc. And I think that when we've got some principles around that, then that will be helpful, but it needs to then be agreed by anybody in the system that is making recommendations, and there's a very large number of bodies that are doing that.